Is this supposed to be some kind of joke, Colonel? The question sliced through the shimmering heat rising from the tarmac, dripping with disbelief and barely concealed contempt. Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Mitchell stood rigid, his professional mask cracking as he stared not at his commanding officer, but at the elderly man beside him. The old man, Benjamin Morrison, appeared completely unbothered by the scorching temperature, the distant thunder of jet engines, or the young officer's obvious disdain. He was a relic from another era, dressed in faded coveralls stained with decades of grease and oil. His weathered hands, thick with calluses and etched with countless hours of mechanical work, hung relaxed at his sides. His attention remained fixed on the silent machine before them, an AH-64 Apache helicopter, the pinnacle of modern military aviation, now rendered utterly useless by some phantom problem hidden deep within its systems. Colonel Marcus Donovan exhaled slowly, the sound barely registering above the whine of a transport plane taxiing in the distance. "Chief, this is Mr. Morrison. He's here to provide us with a fresh perspective on the situation." Mitchell let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held no humor whatsoever. "A fresh perspective, sir? With all due respect, my team has been crawling over this aircraft for 72 straight hours. We've executed every diagnostic protocol in existence. We've replaced the FADIC, performed complete borescope inspections of the turbine assembly, examined every single inch of the fuel delivery system, and swapped out half the sensor array. The digital readouts are completely clean. According to every instrument we have, there's absolutely nothing malfunctioning. Yet somehow, the Port T700 engine refuses to cycle beyond 50% during spool-up. We've got engineers from General Electric on video conference right now. What we definitely don't need is," he gestured vaguely toward Benjamin, "some kind of old-school approach from the Stone Age." Benjamin's gaze never wavered from the Apache. He was somewhere in his 80s now, his face a roadmap of a life spent under merciless suns and crushing pressure. His eyes, though slightly dimmed by age, possessed an intensity that was almost unsettling. He wasn't merely looking at the helicopter. He was studying its stance, the way it rested on its landing gear, the subtle gleam of its composite skin. He was listening to what its silence was trying to tell him. A small group of younger maintenance technicians had assembled at a respectful distance, watching the scene unfold. These were the elite digital natives who could interface with billion-dollar weapon systems through ruggedized tablets and laptops. They had been thoroughly defeated by this mystery, their confidence steadily eroding with each failed engine test. Now they observed this peculiar confrontation, a mixture of curiosity and the same scorn their superior was so openly displaying. Quiet murmurs rippled through the group. Who was this ancient character? Some retired legend the colonel used to know? A good luck charm brought in out of desperation? "Just let him take a look, Chief," Donovan stated, his voice now carrying an unmistakable edge of command that Mitchell couldn't possibly ignore. Mitchell clenched his jaw and stepped aside with an exaggerated gesture of theatrical surrender. "Fine. The flight line is all yours, Mr. Morrison. Just please try not to actually touch anything. It's an extremely sensitive piece of equipment worth millions of dollars." Benjamin gave the colonel a slow, measured nod of acknowledgement and began his inspection. He didn't head directly for the open engine cowling where Mitchell's team had been concentrating their efforts. Instead, he started at the tail section, his gnarled fingers gently following the line of the stabilator. He moved with a deliberate, shuffling grace, a man completely comfortable in this world, saturated with jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. Every movement was economical, his focus absolute and unwavering. He circled the Apache slowly, his head tilted slightly as if straining to hear some whispered secret. The young technicians exchanged knowing smirks among themselves. He looked more like a farmer inspecting his prized livestock than a technician diagnosing a sophisticated turboshaft engine. He eventually arrived at the port side, pausing beneath the engine that had tormented the base's finest minds for 3 solid days. He didn't immediately look up at the intricate maze of tubes, wires, and precision machine components. Instead, he lowered himself to his knees, the joints cracking audibly in protest, and peered underneath at the junction where the engine housing connected to the fuselage. "I need a flashlight," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse. A young sergeant, eager to break the mounting tension, quickly retrieved a high-powered LED torch and handed it over. Mitchell rolled his eyes dramatically, crossing his arms across his chest. "Sir, we've already had military-grade imaging equipment examining every inch of that area. I can absolutely assure you that a simple flashlight isn't going to reveal anything we've somehow overlooked." Benjamin paid him no attention whatsoever. He accepted the light and began playing its beam across the aircraft's underbelly. He wasn't just looking casually. He was observing precisely how the light reflected, how it caught the edges of rivets and seams, how shadows fell across different surfaces. He placed one weathered hand flat against the metal skin of the helicopter and closed his eyes completely. The mechanics watching saw an eccentric old man touching an airplane. Colonel Donovan saw a master craftsman communing with a machine he understood on an instinctive level. He had heard the stories over the years, whispered legends from old-timers about a man they called the Ghost, a mechanic from the Vietnam War era who could supposedly feel a hairline fracture through 3 inches of solid steel. He had made the difficult call to bring Benjamin here as an absolute last resort, a desperate prayer to a forgotten god of the flight line. After a full minute of this silent communion, Benjamin opened his eyes and slowly pushed himself back to his feet. He reached into the deep pocket of his coveralls and extracted a small, worn leather roll. He untied it with practiced, deliberate fingers. Inside, nestled carefully in soft cloth, were not the gleaming precision machine tools of modern aviation maintenance, but rather a collection of oddly shaped hand-forged instruments, polished smooth by decades of constant use. Mitchell's jaw tightened visibly. What in God's name are those supposed to be? Benjamin selected one particular tool. It was a long, slender piece of metal, bent at a precise, almost unnatural angle, its tip ground down to an incredibly fine point. It resembled something more like a specialized dental instrument forged in some blacksmith's workshop than anything belonging near an Apache helicopter. "You are absolutely not putting that primitive thing anywhere near my engine," Mitchell snapped, his professional composure finally shattering completely. "That's enough. I'm calling this whole charade off right now, sir. I appreciate whatever you're trying to do here, but this is becoming a complete waste of everyone's valuable time." As Benjamin held the unusual tool in his weathered hand, the sunlight catching its hand-polished surface, the world around him seemed to slow down dramatically. The whine of distant jets faded away, replaced in his mind by the thumping rotor wash of a Huey helicopter in a monsoon. The sharp smell of jet fuel suddenly mixed with the damp, metallic scent of blood and overwhelming fear. He wasn't standing on a pristine American military flight line anymore. In his mind, he was back in a muddy clearing in the A-Shao Valley, rain plastering his hair against his face, streaming down his neck. A young pilot with a face pale from shock was screaming over the storm. "We have to go now! They're coming!" The Huey's engine had been sputtering badly, a critical linkage severed by flying shrapnel. There were no spare parts available, no proper tools, just the smoking wreckage of a burned-out supply truck nearby. In his mind's eye, he could see his younger self hammering a red-hot piece of leaf spring against a flat rock, shaping it through sheer determination, grinding it, creating the very tool he now held in his hand, decades later. He had used that improvised tool to bypass the damaged linkage, a repair that should have been completely impossible under any normal circumstances, and the Huey had managed to lift off, just as enemy forces broke through the surrounding trees, carrying a dozen wounded soldiers to safety. The tool wasn't merely a piece of metal, it was a living memory, a promise he'd made to himself never to let the machine defeat him when lives hung in the balance. Back it. In the present moment, Sergeant Kyle Anderson, a young but perceptive mechanic who had been observing the entire confrontation, felt a knot of anger forming in his stomach. He had witnessed the way Mitchell was treating the elderly man, the complete lack of respect being shown. But he had also seen something else in Mr. Morrison's eyes, something that gave him pause. It was a look of deep, absolutely unshakable certainty. Anderson had seen that exact expression once before, in the eyes of an explosives ordnance disposal technician, moments before disarming an incredibly complex improvised device. It was the look of someone who perceived a completely different reality than everyone else around them, a world of cause and effect that remained invisible to untrained observers. Mitchell took an aggressive step toward Benjamin, his hand raised as if preparing to physically prevent him from continuing. "Mr. Morrison, I am formally ordering you to step away from this aircraft immediately. You are a civilian, and you are actively interfering with a critical piece of military hardware. Do not force me to call the security forces and have you removed from this installation. This was the ultimate humiliation, the final overreach." The implied threat of arrest hung heavy in the hot, still air. The other mechanics shifted their weight uncomfortably, sensing the situation spiraling rapidly. This had escalated from a mere curiosity to a genuine crisis. Anderson knew he couldn't directly challenge a chief warrant officer without destroying his own career, but he also couldn't simply stand by and watch this injustice unfold. He made a split-second decision and broke from the group, sprinting toward the operations building. Within minutes, he had bypassed normal channels and made a direct call that would change everything. Meanwhile, back at the aircraft, Benjamin continued his examination as if the confrontation wasn't even happening. He knelt again, this time inserting his custom tool into a nearly invisible gap between the engine mount and the fuselage. His eyes closed once more, and his entire body became completely still. He wasn't looking for visual confirmation. He was feeling for something, sensing through the metal itself. Then, without any warning whatsoever, the entire flight line erupted into organized chaos. The distinctive sound of rotor blades announced the arrival of a VIP helicopter. Within moments, a full security detail had established a perimeter. Personnel scattered to attention positions as a figure emerged from the aircraft. And those who recognized the rank insignia on his uniform felt their spines straighten involuntarily. It was a 4-star general, and he was striding directly toward their location with unmistakable purpose. Mitchell's voice went completely pale as he recognized General William Carter. He snapped to attention and delivered his sharpest salute, his mind racing through what regulation he might have violated to warrant a personal visit from someone of this rank. But the general walked right past the saluting chief warrant officer without even a glance, his eyes locked on one specific individual. He walked past the state-of-the-art attack helicopter, past the assembled team of expert technicians, and stopped directly in front of Benjamin Morrison. The entire flight line seemed to hold its collective breath in that moment. The 4-star general, a man who commanded vast armies and advised presidents on matters of national security, brought his heels together with precision. He raised his hand to his brow and delivered the sharpest, most profoundly respectful salute Mitchell had ever witnessed in his entire military career. It was a salute conveying deep reverence, a gesture from someone acknowledging a superior, though no rank insignia decorated Benjamin's faded coveralls. "Teddy," the general's voice was thick with barely controlled emotion. "My God, it's actually you." Benjamin slowly lowered his tool from the engine mount. A flicker of recognition sparked in his ancient eyes. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "Pete, you got old," he said simply. A choked laugh escaped from General Carter. He dropped his salute and turned to address the completely stunned faces of the mechanics assembled around him. His voice boomed across the tarmac, each word landing like a hammer blow of undeniable truth. "Men, you have the extraordinary privilege of standing in the presence of a genuine living legend. This is Benjamin Morrison. When I was a 23-year-old captain, my aircraft went down hard in the A-Shao Valley. We were completely surrounded, taking heavy enemy fire with multiple casualties. Nobody could reach us through the fighting, but Teddy Morrison flew in on a medevac Huey that had absolutely no business being airworthy. He landed directly into a hail of enemy bullets, jury-rigged our destroyed engine using nothing but a multi-tool and some salvaged wire, and then piloted his own damaged bird back out with mine flying as shaky escort, saving 18 American lives that day. The man standing before you isn't just a mechanic. He is a genuine miracle worker." He turned sharply to face Colonel Donovan. "Colonel, I want you to read this man's official citation aloud. I want every single person here to hear it." Donovan pulled out his phone with steady hands. His voice was clear and authoritative as he read the official account of the Distinguished Service Cross, detailing the impossible repair performed under direct enemy fire, the quiet heroism that had never once sought recognition or spotlight. As he read, the smirks on the faces of the young mechanics melted away completely, replaced by expressions of pure, undiluted awe. They weren't looking at some crazy old man anymore. They were looking at a giant among men. When Donovan finished reading, a profound silence settled over the entire group like a heavy blanket. The general's gaze, now cold and hard as granite, fell upon Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell. He didn't need to raise his voice. The quiet menace in his tone was far more terrifying than any shouting could ever be. "Chief," he began, his voice dangerously low and controlled, "you have access to millions of dollars worth of diagnostic equipment. You have computers that can measure the tolerance of a turbine blade down to a millionth of an inch. But none of that expensive equipment can teach you how to truly listen. None of it can teach you humility, and none of it can teach you proper respect for those who came before you. He gestured with his chin toward Benjamin. This man's hands have forgotten more about keeping soldiers alive by keeping these machines in the air than you will ever learn from staring at a computer screen. Your fancy diagnostics told you nothing was wrong. He listened to the silence, and it told him everything he needed to know. You failed because you thought you were smarter than the machine itself. He succeeded because he understood that he wasn't. The public rebuke was absolutely complete and devastating, delivered in front of Bob Mitchell's entire team. The chief warrant officer's face, which had been red with anger moments before, was now pale with deep shame. He stared at the ground, completely unable to meet the general's eyes. Just then, Benjamin Morrison, the object of all this veneration, took a shuffling step forward. He looked directly at the humiliated young officer, and when he spoke, his voice carried not triumph, but gentle instruction. "It's not your fault, son," he said, and the genuine kindness in his tone was perhaps the most surprising element of all. The machines nowadays are loud. The computers are loud and insistent. You were trained to listen to all that electronic noise and trust what it tells you. But the machine itself, it always whispers the real truth. You just have to make yourself quiet enough inside to actually hear it properly. He held up his handmade tool, the one forged in the crucible of desperate warfare decades ago. Your borescope couldn't detect the crack because it's a pressure fracture that only reveals itself under very specific conditions. It only opens up when the pneumatic line experiences the precise stress level that occurs during a 50% spool-up sequence. It remains completely invisible when the engine is cold and static on the ground. Your diagnostic equipment is designed to look for a fixed state of being. I was listening for a moment of becoming, that critical instant when something transforms from functional to broken. As he spoke, another memory surfaced with crystal clarity, not of creating the tool, but of using it under fire. His younger self in that muddy clearing, pressing the tool's tip against the damaged linkage of the Huey, while bullets cracked overhead. He hadn't been just looking at the problem. His fingers, his entire arm, had become a living sensor, feeling the subtle, discordant vibration, detecting the tiny tremor that revealed where the metal was weakest and most likely to fail completely. The tool hadn't been just a wrench or a probe. It was an extension of his own senses, refined over years, a conduit for wisdom born of pure, desperate necessity and countless hours of intimate work with machines. He had learned through hard experience to feel the breaking point before it actually broke. Back on the hot tarmac, he looked directly at Mitchell with understanding in his eyes. You don't find a problem like this one with your eyes alone. You find it with your hands, with your intuition, with everything you have learned about how these machines actually behave under stress. In the immediate aftermath of this revelation, everything shifted into motion with renewed and profound purpose. Following Benjamin's precise instructions, a maintenance crew that now included a silent and thoroughly humbled Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell carefully removed the specific pneumatic line he had indicated. There, examined under a microscope in the maintenance bay, was the fracture exactly as predicted. It was almost completely invisible to the naked eye, a hairline crack no thicker than a spider's silk thread. But it was precisely where Benjamin had said it would be located. The damaged part was immediately replaced with a new component. The Apache's engine cowling was sealed properly. With General Carter and Colonel Donovan watching closely, the pilot initiated the standard startup sequence. The port engine began spooling up, the whine climbing steadily past 50%, then 60, then 80, until it finally settled into a perfect, stable, deafening roar of properly functioning power. The ghost in the machine had been successfully exorcised. General Carter turned to Colonel Donovan with determination in his voice. I want a completely new mandatory training module developed immediately for every maintenance crew on this installation. And I want it distributed throughout the entire Army Aviation Branch as soon as possible. Call it Advanced Tactile Diagnostics and Intuitive Engineering. And the lead instructor, he said firmly, placing a hand on Benjamin's shoulder, will be Mr. Morrison, assuming he'll accept the paid consultant position we're offering. The following day, a formal base-wide commendation was officially issued, not only honoring Benjamin for his critical discovery, but also comprehensively documenting his legendary service record for an entirely new generation of mechanics to study and learn from. Chief Warrant Officer Mitchell was not disciplined in any traditional sense. Instead, his punishment was to become the very first student enrolled in Benjamin's newly created course. Several weeks later, the scene had become much quieter and more contemplative. Inside the base's main maintenance workshop, Mitchell stood before a workbench, clumsily attempting to use a hand file on a small block of aluminum. His movements were jerky and uncertain as he tried to replicate one of the simple handmade tools from Benjamin's leather roll, failing quite miserably at the task. A shadow fell across the workbench. Benjamin stood beside him, holding a steaming mug of coffee in his weathered hands. He watched silently for a long moment, then set his mug down carefully. He didn't say a single word about the confrontation on the flight line weeks earlier. He simply reached out and gently adjusted Mitchell's grip on the file, showing him the proper angle and pressure. "Easy now," the old man said quietly, his voice a low, patient rumble. "Don't fight against it. Let the tool do the work it was designed for. Feel how it wants to cut through the metal. Listen to what it's telling you." Under the old veteran's patient guidance, Mitchell's strokes gradually became smoother and more confident. He was still clumsy and awkward, but for the first time in his career, he wasn't just forcing the tool against the metal through brute determination. He was actually listening to it, paying attention to the feedback it provided. He was finally beginning to understand what Benjamin had been trying to teach him. In the quiet sanctuary of the workshop, away from the pressure and the constant noise of the flight line, a different kind of repair was taking place. One built on mentorship, humility, and the timeless transfer of hard-won wisdom from one generation to the next. Benjamin Morrison's story serves as a powerful reminder that the greatest tools we possess are not always found in a toolbox or displayed on a computer screen, but rather in the hands and hearts of those who came before us, who learned their craft through fire and necessity. True expertise is earned through experience and hardship, not just downloaded from a training manual or absorbed from a video screen.